Just then, Hagrid entered the great hall. He was wearing his long moleskin overcoat and was absent-mindedly swinging a dead polecat from one enormous hand. "All right," he said eagerly, pausing on the way to the staff table. "You're in my first ever lesson right after lunch. Been up since 5 getting everything ready. Hope it's okay. Me, a teacher, honestly." He grinned broadly at them and headed off to the staff table, still swinging the polecat. "Wonder why he's been getting ready," said Ron, a note of anxiety in his voice. The hall was starting to empty as people headed off towards their first lesson. Ron checked his course schedule. "We better go look. Divination at the top of the North Tower. It'll take us 10 minutes to get there." They finished their breakfast hastily, said goodbye to Fred and George, and walked back through the hall. As they passed the Slytherin table, Malfoy did yet another impression of a fainting fit. Shouts of laughter followed Harry into the entrance hall. The journey through the castle to North Hall was a long one. 2 years at Hogwarts hadn't taught them everything about the castle, and they'd never been inside the North Tower before. "There's got to be a shortcut," Ron panned as they climbed their seventh long staircase and emerged on an unfamiliar landing, where there was nothing but a large painting of a bare stretch of grass hanging on a stone wall. "I think it's this way," said Hermione, peering down the empty passage to the right. "Can't be," said Ron. "That's south. Look, you can see a bit of lake out of that window." Harry was watching the painting. A fat apple-gray pony had just ambled onto the grass and was gazing nonchalantly. Harry was used to the subjects of Hogwarts paintings moving around and leaving their frames to visit one another, but he always enjoyed watching it. A moment later, a short, squat knife in a suit of armor clanked into the picture after his paint. By the look of the grass stains on his metal knees, he had just fallen off. "Aha!" he yelled, seeing Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "What villains are these, and trespass upon my private lands? Come to scorn at my fall, perchance? Draw, you knaves, you dogs!" They watched in astonishment as the little knight tugged his sword out of his scarab and began brandishing it violently, hopping up and down in rage. But the sword was too long for him, and particularly wild swing made him ever bounce. He landed face down in the grass. "Are you all right?" said Harry, moving closer to the picture. "Get back, you scurvy braggart! Back, you rogue!" The knight seized his sword again and used it to push himself back up, but the blade sank deeply into the grass, and though he pulled it with all his might, he couldn't get it out again. Finally, he had to flop back down onto the grass and push up his visor to mop his sweating face. "Listen," said Harry, taking advantage of the knight's exhaustion. "We're looking for the North Tower. You don't know the way, do you?" "A quest?" The knight's rage seemed to vanish instantly. He clanked to his feet and shouted, Come follow me, dear friends, and we shall find our goal, or else shall perish bravely in the charge." He gave the sword another fruitless tug, tried and failed to mount the fat pony, gave up, and cried, "On foot then, good sirs, and gentle lady, on!" As he ran clanking loudly into the left side of the frame and out of sight, they hurried after him along the corridor, following the sound of his armor. Every now and then they spotted him running through a picture ahead. "Be of stout heart, the worst is yet to come," yelled the knight, as they saw him reappear in front of an alarmed group of women in crinolines, whose picture hung on the wall of a narrow spiral staircase. Puffing loudly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed the tightly spiraling stairs, getting dizzier and dizzier, until at last they heard the murmur of voices above them and knew they had reached their classroom. "Farewell!" cried the knight, popping his head into the painting of some sinister-looking monks. "Farewell, my comrades in arms! If ever you have need of noble heart and stealthy swine, call upon Sir Gathacone." "Yeah, we'll call you," muttered Ron as the knight disappeared, "if we ever need someone mental." They climbed the last few steps and emerged onto the tiny landing where most of the class was already assembled. There were no doors off this landing, but Ron nudged Harry and pointed to the ceiling, where there was a circular trapdoor with a brass plaque on it. "Sybil Trelawney, divination teacher," Harry read. "How are we supposed to get up there?" As though in answer to his question, the trapdoor suddenly opened, and a silvery ladder descended right at Harry's feet. Everyone got quiet. "After you," said Ron, grinning, so Harry climbed the ladder first. He emerged into the strangest-looking classroom he had ever seen. In fact, It didn't look like a classroom at all. More like a cross between somebody's attic and an old-fashioned tea shop. At least 20 small circular tables were crammed inside it, all surrounded by chintz armchairs and fat little poofs. Everything was lit by a dim crimson light. The curtains at the window were all closed, as the many lamps were draped with dark red scarves. Stifling hot, and the fire that was burning under the crowded mantelpiece was giving off a heavy, sickly sort of perfume, as it heated a large copper kettle. The shelves running around the circular wall were crammed with dusty-looking feathers, stubs of candles, many packs of tattered playing cards, countless silvery crystal balls, and a huge array of teacups. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder at the class assembled around them, all talking in whispers. "Where is she?" Ron said. A voice came suddenly out of the shadows, a soft, mystery voice. "Welcome," it said. "How nice to see you in the physical world at last." Harry's immediate impression was of a large glittering insect. Professor Trelawney moved into the firelight, and then they saw she was very thin. Her large glasses magnified her eyes to several times their natural size, and she was draped in a gauzy spangled shawl. Innumerable chains and beads hung around her spindly neck, and her arms and hands were encrusted with bangles and rings. "Sit, my child, sit. Sit, my children, sit," she said, and they all climbed awkwardly into armchairs or sank on the posts. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat themselves around the same round table. "Welcome to divination," said Professor Trelawney, who had seated herself in a winged armchair in front of the fire. "My name is Professor Trelawney. You may not have seen me before. I find that descending too often into the hustle and bustle of the main school clouds my inner eye." Nobody said anything to this extraordinary pronouncement. Professor Trelawney delicately rearranged her shawl and continued. "So you've chosen to study divination, the most difficult of all magical arts. I must warn you at the onset, that is, if you do not have the sight, there is very little I will be able to teach you. Books can take you only so far in this field." At these words, both Harry and Ron glanced, grinning at Hermione, who looked startled at the news that books wouldn't be much help in this subject. Many witches and wizards, talented though they are in the area of love, bangs, and smells, and sudden disappearance, are yet unable to penetrate the veiled mystery of the future, Professor Trelawney went on. Her enormous gleaming eyes moved from face to nervous face. It is a gift granted to few. "You, boy," she said sadly to Neville, who almost toppled off his fifth. "Is your grandmother well?" "I think so," said Neville tremulously. "I wouldn't be so sure if I were you, dear," said Professor Trelawney. The firelight glinted on her long emerald earrings. Neville gulped. Professor Trelawney continued placidly. "We will be covering the basic methods of divination this year. The first time will be devoted to reading the tea leaves. Next time we shall progress to palmistry. By the way, my dear," she shot suddenly at Pavarotti Patel. "Beware a red-haired man." Pavarotti gave a startled look at Ron, who was right behind her, and edged her chair away from him. "In the second term," Professor Trelawney went on, "we shall progress to the crystal ball, if we have finished with fire omens, that is. Unfortunately, class will be disrupted though you are by a nasty bad of flu. I myself will lose my voice, and around Easter, one of our numbers will leave us forever." A very tense silence followed this pronouncement, but Professor Trelawney seemed aware of it. "I wonder, dear," she said to Lavender Brown, who was nearest and shrank back in her chair, "if you could pass me the largest silver teapot." Lavender looked relieved, stood up, took an enormous teapot from the shelf, and put it down on the table in front of Professor Trelawney. "Thank you, my dear. Incidentally, the thing you are dreading, it will happen on Friday, the 16th of October." Lavender trembled. "I want you all to divide into pairs. Collect a teacup from the shelf. Come to me and I will fill it. Then sit down and drink. Drink until the dregs remain. Swirl those around the cup 3 times with the left hand. Then turn the cup upside down on its saucer. Wait for the last tea to drain away. Then give your cup to your partner to read. You will interpret the patterns using pages 5 and 6 of Unfolding the Future. I shall move among you, helping and instructing. Oh, and dear, she caught Neville by the arm as he made to stand up. After you've broken your first club, would you be so kind? Would you be so kind as to select one of the blue patterned ones? I'm rather attached to the pink. Sure enough, Neville no sooner reached the shelves of teacups when there was a tinkling of breaking china. Professor swept over him, holding a best painted brush, and said, "One of the blue ones, then, dear, if you wouldn't mind." "Thank you." When Harry and Ron had their teacups filled, they went back to their table and tried to drink the scalding tea quickly. They swilled the drops around as Professor Trelawney had instructed, then drained their cups and swapped. "Right," said Ron as they both opened their books at pages 5 and 6. "What can you see in mine?" "A load of soggy brown stuff," said Harry. The heavy perfumed smoke in the room was making him feel sleepy and stupid. "Broaden your minds, my dear, and allow your eyes to see past the mundane," Professor Trelawney cried through the gloom. Harry tried to pull himself together. "Right. You got a crooked sort of cross," he consulted on fogging the future. "That means you're going to have trials and suffering. Sorry about that, but there's this thing that could be the sun. Hang on. That means great happiness. So you're going to suffer, but be very happy. You need your inner eye tested, if you ask me," said Ron. They both had to stifle their laughter. Their laughs as Professor Trelawney gazed in their direction. "My turn," Ron peered into Harry's teacup. His forehead wrinkled with effort. "There's a blob, a bit like a bowler hat," he said. "Maybe you're going to work for the Ministry of Magic." He turned the teacup the other way. "But this way it looks like an acorn." "What's that?" He scanned his copy of Unfogging the Future. "A windfall, unexpected gold." "Excellent, you can lend me some." "There's this thing that looks like an animal." "Yeah, if that was its head, it looks like a hippo." "No, a sheep." Professor Trelawney whirled around as Harry let out a snort of laughter. "Let me see that, my dear," she said reprovingly to Ron, sweeping over and snatching Harry's cup from him. Everyone quite quiet to watch. Professor Trelawney was staring into the cup, rotating it clockwise. "The falcon, my dear, you have a deadly enemy." "But everyone knows that," said Hermione in a loud whisper. Professor Trelawney stared. Well, they do," said Hermione. "Everyone knows about Harry, and you know who." Harry and Ron stared at her with a mixture of amazement and admiration. They had never heard Hermione speak to a teacher like that before. Professor Trelawney chose not to reply. She lowered her huge eyes to Harry's cup again and continued to serve. "The cup, an attack. Dear, dear, this is not a happy cup." "I thought that was a bowler hat," said Ron sheepishly. "The skull, danger in my path, my dear." Everyone was staring transfixed, and Professor Trelawney, who gave the cup a final turn, gasped and then screamed. There was another tinkle of breaking china. Neville had smashed his second cup. Professor Trelawney sank into a vacant armchair, her glaring hand and her eyes closed. "My dear boy, my poor dear boy, no, it's kinder not to say no. Don't ask me." "What is it, Professor?" said Dean Thomas at once. Everyone got to their feet, and slowly they crowded around Harry and Ron's table, pressing closer to Professor Trelawney's chair to get a good look at Harry's cup. "My dear," Professor Trelawney's huge eyes opened dramatically, "you have the Grim." "The what?" said Harry. He could tell that he wasn't the only one who didn't understand. Dean Thomas shrugged at him, and Lavender Brown looked puzzled. But nearly everybody else clapped their hands to their mouth in horror. "The Grim, my dear, the Grim!" cried Professor Trelawney, who looked shocked that Harry hadn't understood. "The giant spectral dog that haunts graveyards, my dear, is an omen, the worst omen of death." Harry's stomach lurched. The dog on the cover of Death Omens and Flourish Blocks. Lavender Brown slapped her hands to her mouth, too. Everyone was looking at Harry. Everyone except Hermione, who had gotten up and moved around to the back of Professor Trelawney's chair. "I don't think it looks like a Grim," she said flatly. Professor Trelawney surveyed Hermione with melting dislike. You'll forgive me for saying so, my dear, but I perceive very little aura around you, very little receptivity to the reticence of the future." Miss Finnegan was tilting his head from side to side. "Looks like the Grim you do, if you do this," he said with his eyes all misshut. But it looks more like a donkey from here, he said, leaning to the left. When you all finish deciding whether I'm going to die or not, said Harry, taking him even him by surprise. Now nobody seemed to want to look at him. I think we will leave the lesson here for today, said Professor Trelawney in her mischievous voice. Yes, please pack away your things. Silently, the class took their teacups back to Professor Trelawney, packed away their books, and closed their bags. Even Ron was avoiding Harry's eyes. Until we meet again, said Professor Trelawney faintly. Fair fortune be yours. Oh, and dearest, she planned to nibble. You'll be late next time, so mind you work extra hard to catch up. Harry, Ron, and Hermione descended Professor Trelawney's ladder and the winding staircase in silence and set off to Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration lesson. It took them so long to find her classroom that early as they had left divination, they were only just in time. Harry chose a seat right at the back of the room, feeling as though he were sitting in a very bright spotlight. The rest of the class kept shooting furtive glances at him as though he was about to drop dead in a moment. He hardly heard what Professor McGonagall was telling them about Animagi, wizards who could transform a will into animals, and wasn't even watching when she transformed herself in front of their eyes into a tabby cat with spectacle markings around her eyes. Really? What has gotten into you all today, said Professor McGonagall, turning back into herself with a faint pop. It was staring around at all of them. Not that it matters, but that's the first time my transformation knocked out applause from class. Everyone's heads turned towards Harry again, but nobody spoke. Then Hermione raised her hand. Please, Professor, we just had our first divination class. We were reading tea leaves, and, of course, said Professor McGonagall, suddenly frowning. There is no need to say any more, Miss Granger. Tell me, which of you will be dying this year? Everyone stared at her. Me, said Harry finally. I see, said Professor McGonagall, fixing Harry with her beady eyes. Then you should know, Potter, that Sybil Trelawney had predicted the death of one student a year since she arrived at this school. None of them have died yet. Seeing death omens is her favorite way of greeting a new class. If it was not for the fact that I never speak ill of my colleagues, Professor McGonagall broke off, and they saw that her nostrils had gone wide. She went on more calmly. Divination is one of the most impressible branches of magic. I should not conceal from you that I have very little patience with it. True seers are very rare. And Professor Trelawney, she stopped again, then said in a very matter-of-fact tone, you look in excellent health to me, Potter, so you will excuse me if I don't let you off homework today. I assure that if you die, you need not hand it in. Hermione laughed, and Harry felt a bit better. It's hard to feel scared with a lump of tea leaves away from the dim red light and befuddling perfume of Professor Trelawney's classroom. Not everyone was convinced, however. Ron still looked worried, and Lambda whispered, what about Neville's cup? When the Transfiguration class had finished, they joined the crowd, thundering toward the great hall for lunch. Ron, cheer up, said Hermione, pushing a dish of stew towards him. You heard what Professor McGonagall said. Ron spit some stew onto his plate and picked up his fork, but didn't start. Harry, he said in a low, serious voice, you haven't seen a great black dog anywhere, have you? Yeah, I have, said Harry. I saw one the night I left the Dursleys. Ron let his fork fall with a clatter. Probably a stray, said Hermione calmly. Ron looked at Hermione as though she had gone mad. Hermione, if Harry had seen a grim, that's bad, said my uncle Belius saw one, and he died 24 hours later. Coincidence, said Hermione aridly, pouring herself some pumpkin juice. You don't know what you're talking about, said Ron, starting to get angry. Grim scared the living daylights out of Miss Wizards. There you are, then, said Hermione in a superior voice. They see the Grim and die of fright. The Grim's not known, and it's a cause of death. And Harry's still with us because he's not stupid enough to see one and think, right, well, I better kick the bucket then. Ron mirthworthily at Hermione, who opened her bag, took out her new arithmetic book, and propped it against the juice bug. I think divination seems woolly, she said, searching for a page. A lot of guesswork, if you ask me. There was nothing woolly about the Grim and that cuff, said Ron hotly. You didn't seem so confident when you were telling Harry it was a sheep, said Hermione coolly. Professor Trelawney said you didn't have the right aura. You just don't like being bad at something for a change. He had touched her nerve. Hermione slammed her arithmetic book down on the table so hard that bits of meat and carrot flew everywhere. If being good at divination means I have to pretend to see death omens in a lump of tea leaves, I'm not sure I'll be studying that much longer. That lesson was absolute rubbish compared with my arithmetic class. She snatched up her bag and stalked away. Ron frowned after her. What's she talking about? Said to Harry. He said to Harry, she hasn't been to an arithmetic class yet. Harry was pleased to get out of the castle after lunch. Yesterday's rain had cleared the sky. The sky was clear, pale gray, and the grass was springy and damp underfoot as they set off for their first ever Care of Magical Creatures class. Ron and Hermione weren't speaking to each other. Harry walked beside them in silence as they went down the sloping lawns to Hagrid's hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. It was only then when he spied only two familiar backs ahead of them that they realized he must be having these lessons with Slytherins. Malfoy was talking adamantly to Crabbe and Goyle, who were chortling. Harry was quite sure he knew what they were talking about. Hagrid was waiting for his class at the door of his hut. He stood with his moleskin overcoat, with Fang at the boarhound at his heels, looking impatient to start. Come on, get a move on, he called as the class approached. Got a real treat for you today. Great lesson coming up. Everybody here? Right. Follow me. For one nasty moment, Harry thought that Hagrid was going to lead them into the forest. Harry had had enough unpleasant experiences in there to last him a lifetime. However, Hagrid strolled off around the edge of the trees, and 5 minutes later, they found themselves outside a kind of paddock. There was nothing there. Everyone gather around the fence there, he called. That's it. Make sure you can see. The first thing you want to do is open your books. How? Said the cool, drawling voice of Draco Malfoy. Eh? Said Hagrid. How do we open our books? Malfoy repeated. He took out his copy of the Monster Book of Monsters, which he had bound shut with a leg of rope. Other people took theirs out too. Some, like Harry, had belted their books shut. Some had crammed them inside tight bags or clamped together with binder clips. Hasn't anyone been able to open their books? Said Hagrid, looking crestfallen. The class all shook their head. Well, you gotta stroke them, said Hagrid, as though this was the most obvious thing in the world. Look! He took Hermione's copy and ripped off the spill of tape that bound it. The book tried to bite, but Hagrid ran a giant forefinger down its spine. Then the book shivered and fell open and lay quiet in his lap. Oh, how silly we have all been. Malfoy sneered. We should have stroked them. Why didn't we guess? I thought they were funny, Hagrid said uncertainly to Hermione. Oh, tremendously funny, said Malfoy. Really witty. Giving us books to try and rip our hands off. Shut up, Malfoy, said Harry quietly. Hagrid was looking downcast, and Harry wanted Hagrid's first lesson to be a success. Right then, said Hagrid, who seemed to have lost his thread. So you got your books, and now you need the magical creatures. Yeah, so I'll go and get them. Hang on. He strode away from them into the forest and outside. God, this place is going to the dogs, said Malfoy. Oh, teaching classes. My father all fit when I tell him. Shut up, Malfoy, Harry repeated. Careful, Potter, there's a Dementor behind you. Oh, squealed Lavender Brown, pointing toward the opposite side of the paddock. Trotting toward them were a dozen of the most bizarre creatures Harry had ever seen. They had bodies, hind legs with tails of horses, but the front legs, wings, and heads of what appeared to be a giant eagles, with crows still colored steel-colored beaks, and large, brilliant orange eyes. The talons on their front legs were half a foot long and deadly looking. Each of the beasts had a large thick collar around its neck, which was attached to a long chain, and the ends of all these were held in the vast hands of Hagrid, who had come jogging into the pack behind the creatures. "Gee up there!" he roared, shaking the chains and urging his creatures toward the fence where the class stood. Everyone drew back slightly as Hagrid reached them and tethered the creatures to the fence. "Hippogriffs!" Hagrid roared, happily waving a hand at them. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Harry could sort of see what Hagrid meant. Once you got over the first shock of seeing something that was half horse, half bird, you started to appreciate the hippogriffs' gleaming clothes changing smoothly from feather to hair, each of them a different color: stormy gray, bronze, pinkish roan, gleaming chestnut, and inky black. "So," said Harry, rubbing his hands together and being round, "if y'all want to come a bit nearer." No one seemed to want to. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, however, approached the fence cautiously. "Now, first thing you gotta know about hippogriffs is they're proud," said Hagrid. "Easily offended, hippogriffs are. Don't never insult one, 'cause it might be the last thing you do." Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle weren't listening. They were talking in an undertone, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were plotting how best to disrupt the class. Well, the lesson. "You always wait for the hippogriff to make the first move. It's polite, you see. You walk toward him and you bow, and you wait. If he bows back, you're allowed to touch him. If he doesn't bow, then get away from him sharpish, 'cause those talons hurt." "Right. Who wants to go first?" Mr. Claus backed farther away in answers. Even Harry, Ron, and Hermione had misgivings. The hippogriffs were tossing their fair heads, flexing their powerful wings. They didn't seem to be being tethered to it like this. "No one?" said Hagrid with a pleading look. "I'll do it," said Harry. There was an intake of breath from behind him, and both Lavender and Parvati whispered, "Oh, no, Harry. Remember your tea leaves." Harry ignored them. He climbed over the paddock fence. "Good man, Harry," roared Hagrid. "Right then, let's see how you get on with Buckbeak." He untied one of the chains, pulled the gray hippogriff away from its fellows, and slipped off its leather collar. The class on the other side of the paddock seemed to be holding its breath. Malfoy's eyes were narrowing maliciously. "Easy now, Harry," said Hagrid quietly. "You've got eye contact now. Try not to blink. Hippogriffs don't trust you if you blink too much." Harry's eyes immediately began to water, but he didn't shut them. Buckbeak had turned its great sharp head and was staring at Harry with one fierce orange eye. "That's it," said Hagrid. "That's it, Harry. Now bow." Harry didn't feel much like exposing the back of his neck to Buckbeak, but he did as he was told. He gave a sharp bow and then looked up. The hippogriff was still staring hotly at him. It didn't move. "Ha," said Hagrid, sounding worried. "They're right back away now, Harry. Easy does it." But then, to Harry's enormous surprise, the hippogriff suddenly bent its scaly front knees and sank what was in an unmistakably bow. "Well done, Harry," said Hagrid as Ted. "Great. You can touch him. Pat his beak. Go on." Feeling that a better reward would have been to back away, Harry moved slowly toward the hippogriff and reached out toward it. He patted the beak several times, and the hippogriff closed its eyes lazily as though enjoying it. The class broke into applause, all except for Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were looking deeply disappointed. "Right then, Harry," said Hagrid. "I reckon he might let you ride him." It was more than Harry had bargained for. He was used to a broomstick, but he wasn't quite sure a hippogriff would be quite the same. "You climb up there just behind the wing joint, and said Hagrid, "and mind you don't pull any of his feathers out. He wouldn't like that." Harry put his foot on the top of Buckbeak's wing and hoisted himself onto its back. Buckbeak stood up. Harry wasn't sure where to hold on. Everything in front of him was covered with feathers. "Go on, then.